Thanks for joining us for another week of Take Two. We are in a new year, a new decade, depending on who you ask to. People would like to argue about everything these days. So sometimes we're in a new decade. Maybe it won't happen until next year. Whatever side you're on, we are happy that you're here with us today. There's always a lot going on, and this week is no different. One thing that we just want to touch on really quickly, we know a lot of people are talking about the U.S.-led airstrike on Soleimani, a general from Iran. There's been a lot of talk on social media from younger generations upset, worried this is going to start World War III, and they're worried about the implications that should come. I think we should first note that Soleimani, I don't think there's anyone out there who would say that he was a good guy. He's a bad guy. He's gone, and the world's probably a better place. The question is, what will the reaction be, and is the reaction worse than just leaving a bad guy on Earth? Greg, you are on the side of this was a good move.
Sure. Look, we had the early reports from the embassy issues that were happening in where? Iran or Iraq? Was it Iraq where they were, the embassy?
It happened in Iraq, yeah.
Iraq. So they were comparing it to Benghazi. They were saying, look, this is going to be President Trump's issue as it had been President Obama's in the years past, and whatever year that was, on the eve of that election, whenever that was. But anyway, it wasn't that, in my opinion. I thought that there was a very decisive action taken once they understood, or intelligence showed them where the source of that was coming from. I think as a parent, looking at world news and the kind of the world we live in now, the narratives now are just so extreme that my youngest is just genuinely afraid for the things that you've described. The social media and some of the chatter going on, I don't know that there's an appreciation of how strong our military is. We are a lone superpower, and I think that there are things that happen where you are looking to protect United States citizens, United States interests. We have a very strong military, but I think the social media and how some of these stories get away from us or the adults, it has a splash on kids, and I think we got to be careful about that.
You know, I'll agree with that. I think this is a time to watch your sources, and I think it's a time to go to real news outlets. I think it's a time to understand the complexity of the issue and don't try and make this a short soundbite. I do think there are real consequences for people's safety and health, the feeling of it.
Yeah.
And I really do think at this point, I want the military experts, I want sound minds, I want less partisan rhetoric. I want it to really be about the nation and not about building cases for and against actions, and I do think I would say to everybody at this point, turn to real news outlets and dial down social media.
Dial down is really the thing. It's a complicated issue, and most people who are preaching and yelling on social media have no idea what's going on. Even if you are in the realm of where we're looking at politics a lot more often. I mean, I've been doing my research on him too and what this happened, but there's a lot that goes on. This has been happening for decades, so this isn't something that any one of us are really of sound mind and knowledge to be able to talk about. So we're going to keep learning, we're going to keep watching, I'm sure we'll be talking about it in the weeks ahead. Here in Utah, though, it's been a busy week, even few days. Usually over the holidays it is dead and quiet, but it's not. Yesterday, we watched a couple stories where signatures coming in. We talked about the tax referendum last time. They've officially gathered about 550 signatures, I think is their total right now. They say they have thousands more, but those are the ones that have been counted and verified. Last time we said this was a big ask. Maura, as you've been watching this, do you think they have the momentum, the money, the manpower to make this happen?
I love seeing last night on your footage that showed lines. I've never seen lines like that for people wanting to gather signatures. So I'm going to still stay a little pessimistic about the bar that has been created for this activity, but I am going to once again plead to legislative leadership that says, will you please see whether it is, in my case, I feel like maybe a flawed policy, perhaps in their case, they feel like it's good policy. Either way, I would say, please note the disconnect. You have Utahns standing in a line at a library wanting to sign a referendum so that they can reconsider a law that they either clearly don't understand or they disagree with. And so I'm going to say once again to the legislature, you at the very minimum still owe, and the executive branch owes us some leadership and explanation on this. But there are some irreparable flaws. One of the things I'll go back to is, in a democracy, taxation is a way to show where our values and our humanity live. And I think that's an indictment of a food tax.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people are upset about that, and that's why they're lining up. I was surprised myself when I saw that video, because this is a holiday week when people could be choosing to do other things. They were there lined up to do it. Our assignment desk that takes all the calls that come into the newsroom, they said they've been overwhelmed by people asking where they can go do it in their own area. So people are interested in this. The question is, are there 115,000 not only interested, but will show up, sign, and put their name and their money where their mouth is?
I don't. I think it's a high bar on purpose. And I lived through a referendum where signatures were gathered, certified, and brought
2007,
to the ballot.
or which one was it?
2007. It was 2007. And so it doesn't happen very often. I think that our democratically elected republic is a great form of governance. It's the one we have. It's the one I think that works. I think you separate when you have referendums or even initiatives. You're separating policy and how people get their information or how they would subscribe to that issue versus those that you elect. And I don't want to separate lawmakers or a governor from the policy at hand. And so I think that's what happens when you talk referendums or initiatives. Let me just say this, though, Maura, you caught yourself at the very end, but what you said was revealing, and it's what I've learned since I've left the legislature. We can keep asking the legislature to appreciate or to maybe the misinformation, or people don't understand the tax policy, or to maybe try to inform a little bit better. I know, and now watching it from the outside and looking at it, that's not what a legislative branch is built to do. It is built for strength. It is built by numbers. They do not have a bully pulpit. There isn't a way for them to hold 10 more town hall meetings and the well of understanding of this bill increase. This really is, and you can tell by poll numbers and name ID for a governor, just like Governor Huntsman in 2007, or a Reagan President Reagan, or how a president looks to cut taxes or have an initiative regarding taxes. Your executive branch, your chief executive, has to lead that charge. They have to inform the public at large, and the mere fact that we're calling it the legislature's effort means that there is an absence of that discussion going on right now.
There's
and therein
one
lies
more
the problem.
component that I want to bring up, and I think that it's where people should take the most action. And it is the fact that another really important way to voice how you feel, how you're being represented, is during elections. And one
Correct.
of the things that we
Absolutely.
haven't done in Utah is hold people accountable, because we have this notion that they're nice. They're absolutely nice people. But if they are not doing what they're elected to do a job.
Yeah.
And so I would encourage people, regardless of what happens with the referendum, regardless of what happens with amendments, study that issue, particularly a taxation issue like this. It is not complicated, which will lead me to point 2. But to finish point 1, I would say hold them accountable at the election ballot, and also hold your local officials. Don't just talk about the presidential race. Talk about who is your local electeds. But the number 2 that I think is so important during this, that I hope all of our elected officials hear, is the audacity of the argument that happens all the time in referendums and initiatives. The number 1 defense that I hear of elected officials is, well, the people just don't understand it. It's really complicated, and we've taken so much time, and I've studied so hard. The arrogance of a lay legislator telling people who elect them that they cannot understand the components of their own taxation is unbelievable to me, and I take so much umbrage on it. And so I will just say, you should categorically, directly ignore and I would say heckle anyone who tells you that you just don't understand it and they understand it. Every citizen absolutely has the capacity to understand this tax.
They certainly do. I think the difference is, as a lawmaker and having been a public servant, what people may gather from a signature sheet or asked to sign in their, whether at a supermarket or where they are, to put their name to a signature sheet, versus when I would hold a town hall meeting and we could maybe drill down on the issues in a more.
But let's review the process. They
there's
put
a
the
different
signature
takeaway
on to have the discussion, Greg. It's actually
an
more
election.
rigorous.
I think,
it's more
yeah.
rigorous than any policy debate that goes on
But
any day and twice
Maura,
on Sunday, Greg.
The challenge I have with that whole process is that when you do get it qualified for the ballot, then you see the money come in, and you'll see the commercials or the spin lines from the well-heeled opponents or proponents, and I don't find that to be the. It's not like Dancing with the Stars where you call in your favorite.
Who took out all those boutique taxes in the first round. Explain the difference between the money of the lobbyists who took out those taxes.
Look,
there is money in the system, and that's a different topic. I will just say, referendums, people have the capacity to understand them. This is a taxation issue, and at the very least, our elected officials should hear either disagreement at the most, or at the very least, a lack of understanding.
I will agree with you. I will never ever suggest that the electorate is ignorant when they approach anything, because that's how elected officials get elected. So they would be indicting the very system that would send them to represent an area or a district. I'll just say this. I'm all about high information election cycles, however you get there. If you think it's from supermarkets and signature sheets and having big media buys, if you think it's drilling down and holding your elected officials accountable, I'm all about high information. I think that good information drives good decisions, and however you get there is what I think we should be doing.
And I think education really is the key. And voters, as you said, they have the capacity. The question is, do you make the choice to do it? And I think it really is important to educate yourself, because what we're seeing now too is, skipping ahead to another topic, we have full Medicaid expansion that's happening now. This week is the first time. It'll probably be maybe another month before we see how it goes and how many people can sign up. And my understanding is there's no deadline like signing up for Obamacare. You can do it throughout the year. So we'll have to see how it goes. And I think people will be happy that it's there. But there's always repercussions to everything we do. And it's a lot of money, Maura. When we look at the budget, healthcare is a big monster piece of the budget here in Utah. So people got what they wanted now, but they're also going to see that it's going to be a big burden to carry on for years to come.
Sure. I mean, it's a priority is what it is, right? And it's a base priority. What we know about preventive care is that it saves money down the line. What we know of this segment of the population, of a couple things who access Medicare and access these emergency goods, one of the things we know is they don't stay on it forever. That's a complete fallacy. It's not a fallacy that you live for this line of government support. So these are people who are wanting to change their position. Two, what we know of these at-risk groups are they're going into emergency rooms, and the state, in essence, through longer and more paperwork, is paying 3 times as much. Greg's going to tell you about concerns about an over-inscribement to this, and that'll be good to hear. But what we're finding,
preempting
is that
sarcastic there.
I get a chance.
But what we're finding is when Utah applied the limited Medicaid, I mean, we did well with it. So really, all we did through the legislative disagreement with what the public wanted was just deny access for several months, and now we are to full Medicaid. Utah is a well-managed state, and Utah plans for the future, and we do have the means and the funds to help those at the margins with the very basics of their health. And this is a tremendous policy, and I think we'll use it to serve well. I do think in the long run, healthcare is such a big ticket on all of our budgets now, and so I'm not ignoring that. That is nothing to be ignored, but it is also your healthcare, and the undue consequence of that is you pay one way or the other.
It is true. Your health matters a lot. We had a story, I think a week or two ago, Greg, that people were actually showing up to the emergency room for dental care, which blew my mind, because I'm like, what? Who goes to the emergency room? But people don't go to the doctor. Is there a chance that all of this money we're spending and that we're going to see people signing up for Medicaid and we see it help the economy because more people will not be calling in sick for work, or they can actually keep a job or hold a job?
So I think the gap that we were looking to cover is about 150,000 Utahns.
Mm-hmm.
Look, we have far many more Utahns, working families, where healthcare is a larger portion of their household income that aren't eligible for this expansion. I think that there is a growing irony to the drumbeat for Medicaid expansion for people of a certain income level, when I think households and people that really struggle are being ravaged by the deductibles every year that they have to pay, and the larger and larger insurance premiums every month they have to pay for them. And I think that's not just in Utah, but in this presidential election, when you look at states like Pennsylvania and Ohio and Michigan and Wisconsin, there will be, I think, a recoil from the public as a whole to continue to talk about how to provide health care to people without a cost when it is impacting in such a detrimental way Americans broadly. It is not more accessible. It is not more affordable. It is just a reality. And what we're spending all our time staring at, I know this works, and this is what I felt as a lawmaker, there's a lot of federal money for banks and healthcare providers, and so there's an incredible amount of political will to make sure that this segment that I believe we all have that obligation, and I believe what the legislature passed when I was there provided a basic level of health. But to have so much attention and political capital spent on people in need, and for Medicaid, which is an expensive program and a federal entitlement that grows with the rest of them, while so many Utahns are struggling right now and people across this country, there's an irony to that, and I think
Greg,
people are feeling
when the politicians continue to take care of the business side of healthcare and don't take care of the patient side of healthcare, right? And this is a nonpartisan. I'm not putting that on anybody. But what continues to happen in this really complex web is that the business interests have a lobbying force and they have a case for support, but the business interests are winning, and then we do these emergency messages or these emergency relief things for patient care, and what you've done is just increase all the costs. And until we have an appetite to tackle the business side of medicine, I don't know.
Maura, you're satisfying the business side with Medicaid expansion because they're getting those federal dollars 90% to 10% or $9 for $1. When I was in the House, we just proposed to the business side, to the healthcare providers, you pay the $1 to qualify for the $9. They rejected it. They said they're not going to pay $1 to get $9. They refused this model. They want taxpayers in an open-ended 10% of an amount we don't know in a state that doesn't print money like the federal government to pay that open-ended 10% of whatever that ultimate cost would be. The moment we asked the hospitals, the physicians, all of those that are going to receive those federal funds to put in $1 to get $9, they said it's a no deal, and that is the business side, in my opinion. And so that's the trouble I have with this whole topic, is that I think we strain at gnats while we swallow camels when it comes to healthcare broadly. I think it is a terrible issue that is impacting people's lives in ways that they didn't expect until sometimes there's a medical emergency and they're in the throes of it. And I haven't heard from any policymaker the real solution on how we resolve it.
Agreed.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to solve the problem today, but I do think that I'm hoping at some point that there's someone who's running our country or has the people in their cabinet that can really go from the ground up and fix it, because obviously I think we have the minds and the willpower to do it. It's probably not easy, but we need to fix the system altogether. I want to get back to some of those signature gathering items. We are now fully in an election year. It's 2020. We're here, so we can't complain about the fact we're talking about elections. The gubernatorial election getting a lot of attention. That is a weird.
That's a long word.
That is a weird word.
How do you
But
spell
sources close to me say that Greg Hughes might be getting into the race this coming week. We'll all be excited to see how that turns out. Before you get in, though, Greg, I know, how awkward is this for you?
Yeah.
We had 4 candidates who've already thrown their hat into the ring. Amy Winder-Newton, we have Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox, former Governor John Huntsman, and who am I forgetting?
Thomas Wright.
Thomas Wright, who
Yesterday.
finally officially got into the race and is gathering signatures, which a lot of people are like, what? Who's this? Because he, when he was head of the party, was fighting against the signature gathering. But he said it's a new game, so it is a new game. Everyone has said at this point that they're going to gather signatures, except for Rob Bishop, who has decided if he's going to run, but hasn't told us what that decision is. So we're waiting on that. So that'll be interesting. This is I wouldn't even call it a crowded race. This is an exciting race because we have a lot of qualified people getting into this. Let's say if you were going to get into this
Hypothetically,
election, hypothetically,
yeah.
Will you or would you gather signatures?
So if there is or isn't an announcement, which I have to say, we are looking at
so coy.
I know. This is what's so funny. I've actually got beat up over this. Yesterday it said that I was announcing that I was announcing. Okay, I don't come up with
Nobody
these things.
announces they announce.
No, I didn't, and everyone thinks it's like some evil plot or that I'm trying to announce that I announced. I have not announced that I'm announcing that, or I didn't. If you ask me a question, I'm going to give you an answer, and I'm not going to lie about it. So, am I looking at this announcement? Yes. For next week, yes. But that's not trying to preempt anyone else's announcement. So there's all this chatter going on. I'll say this: as far as signature gathering and what I do, well, we'll just have to hear when I announce.
Wait and see
what that
how
is.
It goes.
Who knows?
I know. And when you think about how many people are running and you each need 28,000 signatures and they have to be individuals that haven't signed for anyone else, that's a lot of people in our state who are going to have to get interested and excited about this election. Is this a good thing, Maura?
It's a great thing. That's why I support signature gathering. I support opening the caucus system. The party systems control this. And then one of the things we have to respect, the state of Utah needs to respect, is this portion of the game is party driven. But I think it is really great that you now have, as you suggested, 28,000 times 4, 5, or 6, that people are that interested that they sign. And as you suggested, you can't sign for 2. So you have to think about it a little, and to engage that many members, in this case, the Republicans have a closed system, and so you'd need to be a registered Republican to sign. But to engage that, apathy has been something we've struggled with, in part because we're well managed, in part because we don't think we're competitive. We have an open governor's race. We have qualified candidates. candidates. We have different points of view. We have very different personalities. I think from the get-go to involve the public is a good thing, and I think in the long run, the party, even the Republican Party, although I say that with a small p because I don't know if they're a qualified party right now, but the Republican Party, I think, is better off engaging as many people as they can from the very get-go.
Absolutely, and we should note, if you're listening to this and you are not a registered Republican, you can choose to be in the state of Utah a registered Republican, even if you're an independent or a Democrat in your gut or your heart, if you would like to help decide who the person will be, who will likely lead your state, because the odds are not in the favor of a Democrat, whom I don't think we even have a name for, running. And I know that a lot of people worry, and the reason why there is a closed system is so that you're not having the other party come in and vote for the weakest candidate to put up against yours. But I know a lot of people who really do just want to choose someone who they think will be good at running the state,
Right.
and they file as Republican for that reason. So
Let
you
me
can
pull
do
the
that.
let me pull the curtain back
Ooh,
on
let's do
campaigns
it.
and elections in
Ooh,
Utah.
Sexy.
So it sounds great when we talk about 28,000 signatures per candidate and all of the public participation that goes with it. They're paying $10 a signature. Okay,
Yeah.
that's $280K.
That's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. I would say that the people that enjoy the signature gathering process the most are those smart, free market, enterprising people that created companies that are now being paid a king's ransom to go get those signatures. I think you'd have a higher bar requiring a candidate and their immediate spouse to collect 100 signatures. You would have more grassroots and more active engagement than the people that can afford $200,000 plus
cynicism aside, though, we
for
wouldn't be
signatures.
having this conversation.
It's a bit of a
had we not changed
pricey
the system.
prospect.
Had we kept with your little coffee clutch that you were doing before, I'm just going to tell you.
I love this episode. This is a great one.
We would not be having this
cutting a little close.
conversation this early. I will say, also a reminder that the finish line for these guys is in June, right? It's 6 months away. It's not November.
It's true.
So they're looking at a pace, but it has opened the discussion earlier. We did start seeing, you saw candidates declare earlier than they would ever have normally declared because the signature gathering process required them to get in the race earlier.
Look, we
think
passed
it's
a
good
bill
thing,
that required
Greg.
signatures for political parties. In hindsight, I think we tried to save people from themselves. Here's the free market of political parties that ought to be the case, which was always the case in Utah till recently. If a party alienates the public at large, their candidates are not going to win elections. We have to have the patience to let that play through. If we thought that the convention was too insular, that 4,000 people as delegates had the potential to potentially pick a nominee, if the public felt excluded, and it shouldn't, but if it did, they shouldn't vote for that party's nominee.
Great. The change happened. The royal we happened.
And this
We
is
changed
this is the thing.
system.
It's always
What are you
changed from
talking about, my
1992.
friend?
From 1992, going forward, the party through its delegates they always looked for ways. It used to be a September primary. They moved it to June. It used to be 70%. They moved it down to 60%. The party had all political parties had looked at ways to be more marketable with their nominee. We decided in the legislature to create Senate Bill 54, where we were going
And by
to create
decided, you mean there was a ballot initiative that was crushing you, so you thought you would address it?
Create requirements for political parties on how to be a legal party, where we required signature gathering. I don't know. I think that I don't know that it's created the utopia it was promised.
Prior to
create.
SB 54, 4,000 people in the great state of Utah for the Republicans chose their nominee.
No, there were mostly
2,700
there were
chose
primaries.
the Democrats.
There were primaries in those years,
Greg
for the most part.
Hughes.
I mean, actually, every part. Even the year that Senator Bennett lost, there was still a primary between
More
two
is
other
more
candidates.
when it comes to democracy.
It'll be interesting to see how it happens. But when I'm listening to Greg Hughes, our podcast mate, it sounds like if he were to be running as a candidate, that he might not be willing to pay $10 for each of his signatures for votes.
Look,
he does have $500,000 at least.
I can
in the
afford
bank,
it.
though.
I
It's
can
true.
afford to
He's
do it.
got
I just have to
dollars.
decide whether I want to or not. It's a lot of money.
It is a lot of money.
We'll
All
see.
right. It'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. There's other races where people are filing. The one thing that's interesting is watching the 4th District, and this is the hotly contested district we have here in Utah. And we have a lot of candidates already. We already have Daniel Beckstrom, a Democrat, these are the Republicans, Kathleen Anderson, Chris Basinger, Kim Coleman, Salvador Giove, Jay McFarland, Jay Molnar, and Burgess Owen. And that's a lot of candidates. I like seeing the excitement and all of the energy in here. That's a lot of candidates going after McAdams' seat. after we get through where we have already the impeachment votes, we're heading into the new year. Do you feel like these Republicans have a chance?
So, I mean, this line of people vying, I think, is good news for Representative McAdams. We'll peel
they
back.
They can eat each other alive.
Let's
before
peel
they get
back
to
the
it.
curtain on this one as well. What we know in inside baseball is that the Republican Party has sent in operatives in the last month searching for who they want as a candidate.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, they're just
well,
searching.
I'm just saying,
searching.
The Democrats
no,
are
the Democrats
all over this
are
district
just
as
bringing
well.
in
They're on
buckets
TV.
of 20s. They're bringing in their stuff, but they've already chosen their candidate. So the Republicans, I think, why you're seeing interest is you have some national money in here. And to the credit of those opponents, money's hard to raise. And so knowing you could get some national support, this isn't dark alleyways. This is like knowing you can get enough money to communicate is really enticing. The question is, do you have the composition of someone who can beat McAdams and who can match up against him? There's another name floating out there.
Mia Love, who keeps floating her name back again.
Mia, bless her heart, she's coming back. A new name that I heard is Tom Carter, who is a man who runs UCare. He would be a matchup
with a Clean Air Advocacy Group.
Yeah, with the State of Utah Clean Air Advocacy Group. He would be a matchup in that he's, I think, a centrist Republican who has been elected before. I think it's intriguing, and I would say, from my seat, if I were Ben McAdams, I would feel just okay about the line of people wanting to come up against me.
Do you have a favorite? Because I know Republicans, when we're talking about operatives, nobody really realizes this when you're just living your happy lives, but the national parties do come in here and they pick someone who they kind of want to coddle and make sure that they go a long way. I think Dan Hemmert was probably, it seems to me, their choice, and for some reason that is unknown to most of us, at least, unless you have some knowledge, he decided that he wasn't running, so now they're coming in to pick someone. Do you have a favorite where you're like, they can run the mile?
As I understand from State Senator Hemmert, actually it's one of those things that every person has to consider. He has a business, and so how he was going to juggle that became a little bit more of a concern, and so that's why he's got, you know what, he's got a great opportunity to continue as a public servant in the state Senate, and he's a leader in the state Senate, so I think there was that as well with him. You've got some great candidates that have been listed here. The ones I probably have worked with the most is Representative Kim Coleman. I've worked with her as a colleague in the House, and she's a strong conservative and a very hard worker as a campaigner, and she's taken on some tough issues in the legislature. She actually found an agreement between Tesla and automobile manufacturers and our automobile dealers, which is a very, those are three interest groups that are very hard to find policy that everybody's going to agree on. And it took her a number of years, and she did that. So she can show that capacity for advancing strong public policy. That's just one, but she's taken on a lot of hard issues. Burgess Owen is a former NFL player, and I served on a board with him, it's a board that looks to mentor youth that are in the juvenile justice system and show strong examples. And he played for the Oakland Raiders. I don't hold that against him really, but I probably should.
I would.
But he's got a Super Bowl ring, which it does.
Most of us don't have.
Which I like. But he has a strong actual national following in terms of being a conservative and advancing conservative principles from a place of helping lift people out of their conditions and out of poverty. So he's got a unique message, and I think those are the two, probably Representative Coleman and Burgess are the two that I know, having worked with them. And I like what they're doing, and I think it's an easy to win race. I think it's a walkthrough.
So just to give something for Greg to disagree with again, one thing I would encourage people to listen for is the really overt packaged in DC, this person stinks, this person's great.
I hate that.
Just ignore that. I would say dig a little deeper, go to their website.
But that's the problem with congressional races, that they come in, both sides come in and just
it all
dominate
together. So it's like, you know what, go vote for a Utah, go vote for someone who articulates where Utah is. Listen to McAdams' case for support on his record. I mean, I know Greg has some indictments of that, but I say listen to what he's done. And as you're listening to these candidates, if it sounds packaged from DC, kick it out and go find better information in terms of how to vote.
It's probably a choice you have to make as a voter, because even I think Utah has a record of keeping things above board in elections, but now that we have these PACs that come in with their money nationally, you don't always have control over where the money's coming from and who the message is coming from, so you really have to look beyond, like
there's less accountability too. You can get a lot nastier, and you don't have to be committed to the truth when nobody knows where that money's coming from. It's a system that we actually on a state level look to bring transparency to dark money that comes into state races, and it came with its controversy for doing it. But both Republican and Democrats that like their dark money.
Yeah.
But this is what I'm so interested to see, and then we can move to the next topic. I just can't imagine that Donald Trump being in a position on the ballot to be reelected.
Oh, I thought he
in
was
this
running for 4th
district.
district.
I know.
In the 4th district. In that 4th district, when he is on that ballot, I suspect that the 4th district will vote to reelect Donald Trump. As they go down that ticket and they see Congressman McAdams' name, he voted to remove him from office and prevent him from being on that ballot. Is that a decision tree that voters are going to stare at? We don't have impeachments very often. This is not something that's common. We now have a scenario that is unique in itself, that the impeachment articles have not even been delivered to the Senate. There's continued games going on. How much of that can our congressman representing a Republican district be a part of, where there's not, and having only won that seat by less than 700 votes, how much of that will splash back on him regardless of who this opponent is? How much of that
the
is
state
going
of
to...
Utah has 4 representatives,
Yeah.
and this is about choosing those representatives who are going to carry our values, not who's going to be a pawn for the top of the ticket. And Utahns can figure that out, and Utahns have figured that over and over. And we have some complexity about Donald Trump that I've always appreciated.
Or is it the process that where we don't see impeachment? We've seen it 3 times in our nation's history. Are we okay with how we're watching this roll
There
out?
are many of us, this will shock you, there are many of us that believe perhaps Donald Trump didn't exercise the best judgment on his perfect call, and perhaps he did reach out to foreign nationals to help interfere. So what we're talking about is the merit of it, Greg, and I know we disagree on Trump, but I will say again, never cede your right to elect your officials because someone up ticket or down ticket did something you don't like.
Well, yeah,
the fact that
I
you
agree
want
with
to
that.
split your ticket, the fact that you want to have the complexity to not be driven by monikers of Republican and Democrat with have no litmus test to involve themselves in, I hope you split your ticket. I hope you never vote single party, and I hope you can distinguish between those who are duly elected. We have 4 of them. We barely, and hopefully, good Lord willing, we'll have 5 after the next census.
That would
but
be
we
nice.
We have so few, and to say that so go the president, so go your representative is an argument I'm not buying.
So you're detaching
All right,
that. You're
last
detaching
chance.
the president from this impeachment as if they're or our congressman, which as if they're completely separate issues. I don't think they're separate. Here's the issue. For all the merit you just spoke of, that you believe that it was valid to vote to impeach this president, when Speaker Pelosi and the Democrats had the majority, they did not allow the Republicans to participate in that process, as has happened before. And there could not be a greater contrast to that than when you hear Minority Leader Chuck Schumer from the same party, but now in the minority in the Senate, demanding to have a stronger role and a more bipartisan effort in the Senate. It was not the process you saw in the House, and I think it undermines whatever those legitimate or issues or whatever opinions we have about whether that vote should have happened. The pure partisan nature of it in the House, and now having Democrats of that same party clamor for a more fair and bipartisan process in the Senate. Is anybody watching this?
You and
Does
I
this
completely
not
agree.
seem
The
to
process-
be absolutely ridiculous?
The process is embarrassing for
That's
both.
the part that I think splashes on people.
But the outcome has merit, and or not. You can argue that.
Yeah.
Again, when you speak about how you're making your decision about your representative, you cannot make that based on a process you didn't like, which I
not
agree
that you
with
didn't
you.
like, it's how
I
you
don't
get to
think
the bottom of it.
I am critical of Pelosi for still holding those articles.
Yeah.
I am critical for the gamesmanship of what is ultimately what should be a sacrosanct activity of impeachment. I agree with you on all that,
Yeah.
but I also
Thank you.
agree.
Did you hear that? Can we just repeat that? Do we have a
I can
loop?
say it
Can we get the
slowly. Slowly.
I agree
So
with
that
you on
Greg
that. Can we
will-
just have that said over and over?
But I will say, never cede your right to choose your own representatives because of some other gamesmanship on the ballot. That kind of partisan play is where we got where we are.
Yeah,
Yep.
and partisan, we just don't have time for that in 2020. Let's all just take
It's
a deep
2020.
breath. Let's,
We can sort it out.
do
You know that, right? We could get
can
this
sort
whole
it
thing
out.
sorted
It's
out
true.
right here.
And I have like 5 more issues I want to get to, but we can't because we're out of time. Next week, after our kids are back to school and we're getting up in the rise and grind, we're going to talk about whether or not school districts should look at later start times. I have a strong opinion about this, so I can't wait to hear what you have to say. I also can't wait to see if Greg happens to run for governor. We'll have to wait and see. So
this is exciting.
thanks
We just
for
have to
being
see
with
it.
us. So thank you very much, both, as always. Happy New Year to all of you. And please, everyone, take a deep breath. Follow people on social media you don't agree with because it might be enlightening. Thanks for listening and tell your friends about us.